People will tell you that music is just background noise for your life. They are wrong. Music is an obsession. It's the reason I've spent 40 years standing in concert halls across Germany and Europe waiting for that one perfect chord to change my life. We're here to talk about the legends, the new blood, and the stories from the front row. We'll review the shows, argue over the albums, and probably tell you why your favorite band is actually rubbish, or why they're the greatest thing we've heard all year. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, and prepare to disagree with almost everything we're about to say. Enjoy our podcast series, Echoes Encore, brought to you by Awesome Tunes.
Awesome Tunes.
Welcome back to the Echoes and Encores podcast. I'm Dougie. Now, normally when a man of a certain age tells you he's heading into the woods with 30,000 other people to see someone called The Boy, you'd call the constabulary. But this is Frankfurt, and the man is Frank. He's back from a weekend of neon geriatric engineering failures and enough concussive fireworks and fire jets to ensure that any bird flying over Frankfurt has been flash fried and gift wrapped in gold foil. Frank, tell us, was it a pleasure dome or just a very expensive car park?
Hello! Now, before we begin, we must address the setting. The Deutsche Bank Park in Frankfurt. It's a football stadium, which usually means it's a place where men go to shout at a ball and eat sausages. But for one night, it was transformed into a temporal rift. A gateway back to a time when your hair was more flammable than a petrol station, and your trousers were made of a material that strictly forbade sitting down. I am 61 years old. I have the knees of a Victorian chimney sweep and the lung capacity of an old Henry vacuum cleaner that's accidentally sucked up a damp sock. Yet I joined 30,000 fellow survivors of the 1980s in a pilgrimage through the Frankfurt forest. We walked for miles. It was 35 degrees Celsius. Human beings weren't meant to operate in that kind of heat, especially not while wearing stone-washed denim and enough neon spandex to ensure we could be seen from the dark side of the moon by a very confused Neil Armstrong. We got there early and secured a spot right at the front railing, which in your 20s is a triumph. In your 60s, it's just a convenient place to lean so your spine doesn't collapse. However, being at the front meant we were exactly 2 meters away from a confetti cannon that had been calibrated by a lunatic. Every now and then, and without warning, it would fire a payload of paper shards into the stratosphere with the force of a surface-to-air missile. And then there were the flame jets. These weren't mood lighting. These were industrial-grade incinerators. Every time they went off, I felt like a supermarket rotisserie chicken being blasted by a jet engine inside one of those glass-sided roadside vans. Now I had come for one man in particular, Boy George. 2 years ago at Schalke. He was on the poster, he was in the program, and then, poof, shortly before the first note was struck, he vanished from the set list without a single word of explanation. It was the greatest vanishing act since Lord Lucan, but this time his face was right there, beaming down from the giant LED screens in Frankfurt. He was definitely in the building, so what could possibly go wrong? The answer is, as it turns out, a lot. But first, the fashion. It wasn't getting dressed, it was costuming. Imagine, if you will, the 1980s, a decade of excess, replicated by people whose waists have, over the last 40 years, suffered a massive geological shift, similar to the movement of tectonic plates. It was a sea of polyester, Hawaiian shirts and mesh vests that appeared to be held together purely by static electricity and optimism. It was a festival of schadenfreude. The music kicked off with F.R. David. Now David is French and he is old. He's in that Mick Jagger league of biological curiosities. To David, a man like Keith Richards is probably just a promising toddler with a noisy hobby. He had 2 hits back in the day, yet he played 3 songs. I suspect the third one was just a collection of noises he's been practicing in his garden shed. He moved with the cautious fragility of a Ming vase on an ice rink. By the time he finished, he looked like he'd just finished a marathon in a sauna and needed to be placed in an airtight container for his own safety. But then the temperature metaphorically and literally rose. Camouflage took the stage. Now these are the Depeche Mode of Swabia, and they were magnificent. They played The Great Commandment with such industrial precision that for a moment I forgot I was a 61-year-old man with a mortgage and felt like I should be brooding in a dimly lit club in West Berlin. And the singer was so agile, he made the rest of us look like a collection of bronze statues. He was bouncing around with the frantic energy of a lab rat that's just discovered the espresso machine, while the rest of us in the stadium were essentially just a very large group of people waiting for a sit-down and a knee rub. Then, however, we had Kim Wilde. Now, Kim wasn't exactly the poster girl of my youth, but she clearly was for a large portion of the stadium, judged by the sheer number of people wearing Kim Wilde t-shirts, like they were members of a very blonde religious cult. But she fell victim to the most basic rule of engineering: always check your load-bearing structures. She was wearing a black blouse and a corset with a zip on the front. It was a zip that was clearly under more pressure than the hull of a deep-sea submarine. Every time she danced, the zip would spontaneously disassemble itself under the sheer kinetic energy of, well, Kim's boobs. She spent the entire set engaged in a frantic one-woman wrestling match with her own clothing. By the time she got to Kids in America, she had to throw on a glittering robe to try and keep everything contained. It was like trying to fix a burst water main with a bit of tinsel. Musically, it was thinner than a supermodel's lunch. Next up was ABC, or rather Martin Fry. He walked out looking like a limited edition Ferrero Rocher, the silver-wrapped ones you only find in the expensive airport gift shops. He was shimmering with so much metallic intent that I'm fairly certain he was capable of reflecting local radio signals directly into my dental fillings. He had the event band backing him, and honestly, he was a masterclass in professionalism. The Look of Love came on, and suddenly the stadium was a shimmering mass of nostalgia. It was excellent. But the real highlight, Tony Hadley. Tony arrived looking like a British banker who'd just finished a very long, very liquid lunch. He had a glass of Jack Daniels in one hand and enough charisma to power a small city. Now, Tony has clearly been enjoying the finer things in life, and when he first started moving, his hips and his feet appeared to be having a violent disagreement, but within 2 minutes he'd wrestled his motor skills into submission. He is a pro. He erupted with a voice that probably caused minor structural cracks in the stadium's foundation. He joked. He belted out Spandau Ballet hits like his life depended on it. He was a force of nature, a one-man hurricane of charisma and Jack Daniels. After 2 minutes, he turned a football stadium into the world's largest and loudest pub sing-along. And honestly, the sheer volume of 30,000 people singing Gold was enough to rattle the fillings out of your head. And then it happened. As he was dancing his way out onto the catwalk, a bra, a double D, that looked like it had been salvaged from the sail rigging of an 18th century clipper, sailed through the air like a wounded bird and landed right on the stage. Tony looked at it with the mild surprise of a man finding a hedgehog in his sock drawer. I suppose at his age he figured those days were long gone, but he took it in his stride. It was gold. The pyrotechnics went off, the gold streamers filled the air, and for a moment I thought, yes, this is why we're here. Alphaville were next. Marion Gold had recently broken a rib, which usually means a man should be sitting in a recliner with a warm compress. But no, he was there, and he was incredible. It was even more powerful than their performance at the Schlossgraben Festival in Darmstadt a few weeks ago, which is saying something because that was already like being hit by a glittery freight train. Big in Japan was there, of course, but Sounds Like a Melody is just such a powerhouse live song. It's essentially a 6-minute sonic boom. They performed it perfectly, proving that even with a cracked chassis, Marion Gold can still outsing anyone half his age. 9 out of 10 for pure professionalism. And then the moment we'd waited 2 years for, the man who had ghosted us at Schalke, Boy George, I looked at his name on the screen and thought, finally, what could possibly go wrong? Well, quite a bit. I was waiting. I was wearing my Culture Club shirt bought from Temu, so it was probably made of recycled plastic bottles and dreams. George appeared, and he looked like a glittery mountain. He was wearing sneakers that were brighter than the sun, a hat the size of a satellite dish, and a massive black coat with fringe that seemed to have its own weather system. The problem was the coat didn't make him look like a legend, it just made him look fairly small. It was as if he'd been swallowed by a very expensive, very sparkly carpet, leaving him with legs that appeared to be 3 inches long. He was, quite frankly, an overdressed hobbit. The problem was George was in a foul mood, a mood so dark he could have swallowed a black hole. He started complaining about his monitors. He gestured at the sound techs like they'd just insulted his mother. He looked at the event band like they were a group of buskers he'd found in a bus station. He eventually just gave up. He told the band to stop and tried to do Time Unplugged, but the crowd didn't know the words because, let's be honest, we were all waiting for Karma Chameleon. He looked at us, sighed with the disdain of a duchess who's found a fly in her soup, said goodbye and vanished. No chameleon, no do you really want to hurt me, just a void where a legend should have been. 28,000 people started whistling and booing, and not the we want more kind of whistling. It was the I want my money back kind. Later, the moderator, Peter Illman, tried to explain that George might be feeling a bit thin-skinned lately. Apparently he's been at the centre of a massive internet shitstorm after releasing a pro-Israel song, and the pressure has turned his psyche into a very fragile, very expensive piece of porcelain. It seems the boy isn't just battling sound levels, he's battling the entire world, and in Frankfurt the world won. Later, he complained on X that he'd been sabotaged. Personally, I think he just realised it was 35 degrees and he was wearing a carpet. But would I go and see him again? Of course I would. I love his music and everybody should get a second chance. No big deal. He is an icon, and frankly, you have to allow for a bit of famous person behaviour. Otherwise, they'd be as boring as a tax auditor. Finally, Holly Johnson had to come out and fix the mess. He walked onto the stage with a heavy sigh, like a man tasked with cleaning up after a particularly messy stag party. He was wearing a net shirt that did absolutely nothing to conceal a magnificent, age-appropriate beer belly. But God, he could still sing. Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. 2 tribes, relax. He was a professional. He was a grand uncle. By the time he got to the Power of Love, he had put on a black cloak and a crown, and he looked, and I say this with the greatest respect, exactly like a fallen Prince Andrew. The finale was a war zone. They fired off every bit of confetti, every firework, and every Roman candle they had. They clearly used the stuff Boy George had left behind in his huff. It was a blizzard of paper and fire. And then it was over. We walked back through the forest, our ears ringing and our knees screaming for mercy. We didn't go home to a salad. We went to McDonald's because just like in the 80s, when everything else fails, when the zips break, the lead singers storm off and you're dressed like a disco ball, a double cheeseburger is the only thing that actually makes sense. Dougie, if you see Boy George, tell him I want a refund on the Temu shirt.